The evening sun painted the small town in shades of gold, and the local music fair was alive with laughter, chatter, and the sweet sound of instruments echoing through the air. Near a corner stage stood a young woman named Lila, her trumpet glimmering under the soft light. She wasn't part of any big band or sponsored performance. She just stood there, eyes closed, lips pressed to the mouthpiece, playing as if the world around her didn't exist. The notes that left her trumpet were not perfect, but they were alive. They told a story, one that only hearts could understand. People passing by began to stop, drawn by something they couldn't explain. Lila wasn't famous, she wasn't dressed fancy, but her sound touched something deep. An old man took off his hat and nodded to the rhythm. Children swayed, and a few musicians nearby looked over, surprised by her emotion. Among them was someone who didn't just look, but watched closely, the legendary jazz trumpeter, Marcus Dean. Marcus was in town for a charity concert, a global icon known for his speed, technique, and stage power. He was used to grand stages, flashing lights and roaring crowds. But when he heard Lila's trumpet, something made him stop mid-step at first. He smiled with a mix of amusement and curiosity. He thought it was cute, a girl in the streets trying to imitate the greats. He pushed through the crowd, his tall figure and expensive coat making heads turn. When Lila opened her eyes, she saw him standing there, Marcus Dean, the man whose posters had hung in her late father's room. For a second, her breath caught. She lowered her trumpet nervously. Marcus clapped slowly, the crowd turning toward him. "Not bad," he said with a half smile. "But you're missing control. The heart's there, but the hand isn't." His voice carried confidence. "Maybe too much of it." Lila swallowed hard, trying not to show she was hurt. She managed a small smile. "Thank you, sir. I just play what I feel." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Feeling is good," he said. "But music needs more than that. It needs discipline, skill, precision." Then with a smirk, he added, "Tell you what, kid, why don't you prove that feeling can beat skill?" The crowd gasped, not fully understanding at first. Marcus continued, "Tomorrow night at the town concert hall, I'll be performing a special set. You come, and we'll have ourselves a trumpet duel." Lila froze. The crowd broke into whispers. Some laughed, thinking it was just a joke. Others cheered in excitement, but Marcus wasn't smiling anymore. He meant it. Lila's hands trembled slightly. She didn't know if it was fear or shock. Her trumpet had never been tested like that before, especially not against someone like him. Marcus turned to leave, but not before saying one last thing. "If you're serious about music, you'll show up." His words echoed long after he was gone. Lila stood there, trying to process what just happened. The crowd slowly dispersed, though a few stayed to pat her shoulder or encourage her. "You've got heart, girl," one said. "Don't let him scare you." That night, Lila couldn't sleep. The sound of Marcus's words replayed again and again in her head. She sat by her window, the trumpet in her lap. Her fingers ran over the old brass surface, scratched and worn from years of playing. It wasn't new, it wasn't shiny, but it was hers, her father's last gift. She remembered the nights when her father would sit beside her, showing her how to breathe properly, how to let the music flow through her chest. Not just her lips, he'd tell her, "Lila, don't play to impress, play to express." Those words had guided her ever since. Now they echoed louder than ever. By morning, the whole town was buzzing. Posters were printed overnight. Marcus Dean versus the girl with the golden trumpet. The nickname had come from a passerby who saw how her trumpet glowed under the fair lights. Soon, social media caught the story, and people from nearby cities planned to come watch. Lila walked past those posters quietly, feeling both proud and terrified. She had never been on a big stage before, never competed in her life. Her only audience had been random people on the street and her father's memory, but something in her chest told her she couldn't back down. That evening, she went back to the same spot at the fair. She lifted the trumpet to her lips and began to play again. This time, the notes were firmer, sharper, not from fear but determination. She wasn't playing for fame or approval anymore. She was playing to defend what her father had taught her. As the last note faded into the cool night air, an old woman who had been listening smiled and said softly, "Child, that sound comes from your soul. Don't let anyone take that away." Lila nodded, gripping her trumpet tighter. The next night would change her life forever. Whether she won or lost didn't matter yet. What mattered was showing up. She took one last deep breath, looked toward the distant lights of the concert hall and whispered to herself, "I'll be there." The morning sun broke through the thin curtains of Lila's small apartment, but she had barely slept. The weight of Marcus Dean's challenge pressed heavy on her mind. Her trumpet lay beside her on the bed like a loyal friend waiting for battle. Her heart beat fast every time she thought of stepping onto that grand stage, the same stage where legends had performed. And now, she, a small-town girl, was about to stand there too, outside. The town buzzed with excitement. Posters of the duel were everywhere. Cafe owners argued over who would win, and school children tried to copy Marcus's fancy playing style using toy instruments. Everyone was talking about the girl with the golden trumpet, but to Lila, it all felt unreal. She wasn't after fame or headlines. She was chasing something deeper, a promise she once made to her father. Years ago, when she was still a little girl, her father had been her hero. He wasn't rich or well-known, but when he played the trumpet on the streets, people would stop and smile. Music was his language, his way of giving joy to strangers. Even when times were hard and their money was short, he would say, "Lila, music can feed the soul even when the stomach is empty." He had taught her everything: how to breathe through fear, how to turn pain into melody. She still remembered those long nights when the two of them played under the dim streetlights, their music mixing with the wind, filling the silence of the sleeping town. But one night her father coughed mid-song, dropped his trumpet, and never played again. The sickness took him quickly, and the world turned quiet for Lila. Now, years later, that same trumpet, repaired, polished, and loved, rested in her hands again. The duel wasn't just about proving herself. It was about honoring him that afternoon. Lila decided to visit the old community music hall. It was nearly abandoned, dust coating the wooden seats, and the echo of past performances still lingered in the air. She set her trumpet case down and blew softly into the mouthpiece. The sound bounced off the walls, raw, emotional, full of flaws but full of life. After a few minutes, a voice came from the shadows. "You play with your heart." "But your hands are stiff." Lila turned, startled. An elderly man with silver hair and kind eyes stood there holding a broom. He wore an old conductor's jacket with faded golden buttons. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "I didn't mean to intrude." The man smiled. "Intrude?" "It's been years since this hall heard real music." He walked closer, studying her trumpet. "That's a fine instrument, old, but full of stories." Lila nodded. "It was my father's." He looked at her seriously. "Then make it speak again, not with noise, but with truth." He introduced himself as Mr. Gray, a retired music teacher who once directed small-town orchestras before the funding stopped. He offered to help her for the duel, not to win, but to make sure her music reached hearts every day after that. Lila practiced under Mr. Gray's guidance. He was strict but gentle, correcting her posture, teaching her control, and reminding her that every note should mean something. When her lips grew sore and her arms ached, he would tell her, "Pain is just the body's way of making room for mastery." At night, Lila stayed late, rehearsing alone. Sometimes she'd imagine her father sitting in the front row, nodding in rhythm. Her reflection in the hall's glass door looked different now. Not scared, but focused. Each practice session chipped away her fear and replaced it with purpose. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Dean was having his own thoughts. He sat in his luxury hotel suite surrounded by expensive instruments, watching the viral clips of Lila's fairground performance. Her raw emotion unsettled him. He had spent his life perfecting speed, tone, and precision, yet something in her rough sound tugged at him. His assistant joked, "She's just a girl, boss. This will be easy." But Marcus didn't laugh. He remembered his early days, before the fame, when he too played for the love of sound. Somewhere along the way, the pressure of perfection had turned music into business for the first time in years. Marcus wondered if he still played for joy or just for applause. The next morning, reporters surrounded his car asking, "Do you think you'll crush her?" Marcus smiled but didn't answer. Deep inside, he wasn't so sure anymore. As the days passed, anticipation filled the air. The small town had never seen anything like it. News vans rolled in, restaurants hung banners welcoming visitors, and the old concert hall was cleaned and decorated. Everyone waited for the night when heart and skill would meet face to face. On the eve of the duel, Lila stood by the riverside, the trumpet in her hands. The water shimmered under the moonlight. She took a deep breath and played one last time before the big night. The melody flowed soft and sincere. Not a showpiece, but a conversation with her father. The air around her seemed to listen, calm and still. When she finished, a quiet tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away and smiled faintly. "I'm ready, Dad," she whispered. Her reflection in the river looked stronger, her eyes steady. The girl who once played for coins in the street was now about to stand before the world. At the same moment, across town, Marcus cleaned his trumpet slowly. His reflection in the silver bell of the instrument showed a man deep in thought. He wasn't preparing to defeat her anymore. He was preparing to remember why he fell in love with music in the first place. Both of them, in their own corners of the night, breathed in deeply, feeling the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow wasn't just a duel. It was destiny calling through the sound of two trumpets ready to tell their stories. The night before the duel felt endless, and when dawn finally arrived, it carried both excitement and fear across the small town. The streets were already decorated with banners, and every shop window showed the same headline. Tonight, the legendary Marcus Dean versus the girl with the golden trumpet. Lila read it once and quickly turned away. She didn't want to see herself as a headline. To her, this wasn't about fame or competition. It was about proving that her father's music still lived inside her. At the old community hall, she continued her practice. Mr. Gray watched her closely as the sound of her trumpet filled the empty space. "Good," he said after a long note. "But your breath, control it, Lila. Don't let your fear control the music," she nodded, sweat glistening on her forehead. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she refused to stop. After an hour, she lowered her trumpet and sighed. "What if I mess up, Mr. Gray? What if I freeze in front of everyone?" He smiled kindly. "Do you think your father ever worried about the crowd when he played on the streets?" Lila shook her head slowly. "He played for the joy of it, Mr. Gray nodded. "Then do the same. Let the music speak, not your fear." He handed her a small silver pin shaped like a musical note. "This was given to me by my mentor before my first concert," he said. "It reminded me that the heart is the only instrument that never goes out of tune." Lila held it in her palm, feeling its weight, and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, people were beginning to gather near the concert hall hours before the show. Local musicians were playing on the sidewalks, and food vendors filled the air with the smell of roasted corn and caramel. It felt like a festival, but underneath the laughter, there was tension. Everyone wanted to see if the unknown girl could truly stand against the master of jazz. Marcus Dean arrived in a sleek black car wearing his signature coat. Cameras flashed the moment he stepped out. He smiled for the crowd, but his eyes betrayed a different emotion. Inside, he felt something unusual. Not arrogance, but nervousness. He had faced hundreds of challengers in his life, but this felt different. The world was watching, not just for a performance, but for a story. Backstage, the organizers ran around preparing lights, sound checks, and seating arrangements. Lila arrived quietly with her trumpet case in hand. Her simple dress contrasted sharply with the luxury of the hall. The same hall she used to sneak into as a child just to listen to rehearsals. She walked slowly to the empty stage, her footsteps echoing across the polished floor. Mr. Gray followed behind and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Look around, Lila," he said softly. "This is where greats were made, but tonight, this stage belongs to you too." She closed her eyes and listened, to the faint hum of electricity, to the whispering curtains, to the silent anticipation that hung in the air. It felt alive in another room. Marcus was tuning his trumpet. His assistant whispered, "You sure you're ready, boss? That girl's got the crowd on her side." Marcus gave a faint chuckle. "It's not about sides anymore," he said quietly. "It's about sound." He looked at his trumpet, an instrument worth thousands. Shining under the light, it had taken him across the world, earned him fame, but somewhere along the line, he had lost the soul of it as the hours passed. The hall filled to capacity. Every seat was taken, and the air buzzed with expectation. Reporters lined the walls, and the live broadcast cameras rolled into position. Children sat on their parents' laps, clutching toy trumpets, hoping to see magic. Lila stood backstage, gripping her trumpet so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. Mr. Gray noticed and said softly, "When the lights hit you, don't look at the crowd, look at the sound. Feel the rhythm inside you." She nodded, whispering a quiet prayer. Suddenly, the stage manager signaled, 5 minutes. Lila's heart pounded louder than the drums being tested on stage. She could hear Marcus's warm-up notes from the other side. Clean, perfect, confident. The sound made her both scared and inspired. She whispered to herself, "He has fame, but I have purpose." When the lights dimmed, the audience fell silent. A deep voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's special performance, the world-renowned Marcus Dean versus the small-town sensation, Lila, the girl with the golden trumpet." The crowd cheered wildly. Marcus stepped onto the stage first, his trumpet glinting like fire under the spotlight. He gave a confident nod to the crowd and began to play. The first few notes danced effortlessly through the air. Smooth, sharp, and technically perfect. The audience swayed and clapped in rhythm. His mastery was undeniable. Every sound was clean, precise, like the work of a machine that had mastered emotion. When he finished his solo, the hall thundered with applause. Marcus turned slightly and gestured for Lila to step forward. The crowd quieted, waiting. Lila took a deep breath and walked into the light. The glare of the stage blinded her for a moment. But then she saw the empty seat in the front row, where she imagined her father sitting. Smiling proudly, the image steadied her heart. She lifted her trumpet slowly. The first note came out soft, uncertain, like a whisper. A few people murmured in confusion. But then came the second note. Then the third, and stronger, clearer, alive. Her melody wasn't perfect, but it had warmth. It carried the sound of the streets, the laughter of children, and the quiet tears of loss. Mr. Gray stood backstage, tears in his eyes. The audience leaned in, silent. Her music told a story of love, pain, and courage. Even Marcus, standing nearby, found himself lowering his trumpet, listening. Her raw emotion filled the hall in a way his perfection never could. When her piece ended, there was no sound for a heartbeat. Then the hall erupted in applause so loud it shook the lights. Marcus looked at her, truly looked at her. And for the first time in years, he smiled. Not as a competitor, but as a musician who had just rediscovered his own soul. That night wasn't the end of the duel, but the beginning of something no one in that hall would ever forget. The roar of applause still echoed in Lila's ears long after the lights dimmed. Her hands trembled, her lips burned from the intensity of her final note, and her heart beat wildly like the rhythm of the music itself. She could hardly believe what she had just done. She had faced Marcus Dean, the living legend, and the crowd had stood for her. Backstage, she leaned against the wall. Catching her breath, Mr. Gray appeared with a proud smile. "You played beautifully," he said. "You didn't just perform. You spoke to them." Lila smiled weakly. "It didn't feel real," she whispered. "I thought I'd be terrified, but when I saw that empty seat, I felt like my father was right there." Mr. Gray's eyes softened. "He was, child. In every note you played, on the other side of the hall." Marcus sat in his dressing room, silent, staring at his trumpet resting on the table. For years, this instrument had been his power, his crown, but tonight it felt heavier. He thought about the girl's trembling hands, her imperfect yet powerful melody, and the emotion that filled the hall like light pouring into a dark room. For the first time in decades, Marcus had been moved not by perfection, but by feeling. His assistant entered, grinning. "That was some show, boss." "You killed it," Marcus interrupted softly. "Did I?" The man blinked, confused. "Well, the crowd loved her, but you were flawless as always." Marcus didn't respond. He stood, ran his fingers across the trumpet's brass surface, and said quietly, "Flawless isn't the same as meaningful." Later that night, the city was buzzing. Social media exploded with clips of Lila's performance. The girl who dared to challenge a legend. Comments poured in, calling her the soul of the streets, the golden trumpet girl, and even the future of jazz. Lila didn't see any of it. She was at the old community hall, sitting on the edge of the stage, trumpet in her lap, staring into the empty seats. Mr. Gray sat beside her. "You know," he said, "music like that can change lives." She smiled softly. "Maybe it already has." Suddenly, the hall door creaked open and Marcus Dean stepped in. His presence filled the room and Lila froze, unsure whether to stand or hide. He approached slowly, holding his trumpet. "You play differently," he said, like someone who isn't afraid to hurt. Lila looked at him carefully. "I didn't mean to challenge you, sir. I just wanted to play." Marcus gave a small smile. "No need to apologize. I was the one who turned it into a contest." He looked around the empty hall, the same place that once trained his younger self. When I was your age, I played for passion. Then I started playing for money. Then for fame, and somewhere along the line, I forgot how to feel. Lila tilted her head. But you still made beautiful music, Marcus nodded. Yes, but beauty without soul fades tonight. You reminded me what music is supposed to be. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Just two musicians from different worlds sharing the same truth. Marcus finally extended his trumpet toward her. Try it, he said. Play something for me. Lila hesitated, then took the shining instrument in her hands. It felt strange. Heavier, colder, but powerful. She lifted it to her lips and began to play. The sound that came out was rich, deeper than anything she'd played before. The hall vibrated with warmth. Her notes soared through the air like memories reborn. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling every vibration. When she finished, he smiled. That trumpet has traveled across continents, but it never sounded like that before. He took it back gently and said, Tomorrow there's part 2 of the performance. The public expects a rematch. Lila's eyes widened. Rematch? Marcus nodded. Yes, but this time we won't duel, we'll play together. Lila blinked. Together? He grinned. You've got heart, kid. And I've got experience, maybe together. We can remind people what music truly is. The next morning, newspapers exploded with headlines. Marcus Dean invites street musician for duet. Crowds gathered outside the concert hall even before sunrise, hoping to witness something rare. Humility and genius sharing the same stage. Lila woke up to knocks on her door, reporters shouting questions, fans leaving flowers by her steps. She wasn't used to the attention, but her heart stayed grounded. She picked up her trumpet and whispered to herself. For Dad and for the music, meanwhile. Marcus rehearsed quietly in the hall. His fingers moved slower now, more thoughtful. The fame didn't matter anymore. He wanted this duet to be pure, honest, something that would outlive applause. That night the lights were brighter, the air thicker with anticipation. The announcer spoke, tonight not a duel, but a unity of sound, Marcus Dean and Lila together. The audience roared. Marcus nodded at her from across the stage. Ready? He whispered. Lila smiled. Always. Their trumpets lifted in sync. The first notes intertwined like a conversation between two souls. His smooth jazz blended with her raw emotion, creating something entirely new. The audience leaned forward, mesmerized. Each note told a story, his of pride and redemption, hers of loss and hope. Midway through the piece, Marcus stepped back and motioned for her to take the lead. Lila hesitated, then closed her eyes and poured her heart into the melody. Her sound rose like dawn after a storm, and when she finished, Marcus joined back softly, harmonizing instead of competing. When the last note faded, there was silence, the kind that only comes when every heart in the room is full. Then came thunderous applause, louder than before. Marcus turned to her, bowed deeply, and said into the microphone, She reminded me how to feel again. The crowd stood, cheering. Lila blinked back tears, realizing this moment was bigger than victory. It was about healing, about connection, about music that spoke without words. And as they left the stage side by side, both knew their lives and their sound would never be the same again. The world woke up to their music. The video of Marcus Dean bowing before Lila spread like fire across the internet. People from different countries shared it with captions like, The Legend Who Listened and The Girl Who Brought Soul Back to Jazz. By morning, news channels called it the performance that changed modern music. But for Lila, the noise of fame felt distant. She sat in her small apartment by the window, the trumpet resting on her lap. The city outside buzzed, but inside everything felt still. Her phone blinked with messages, offers from agents, invitations to interviews, and concert proposals. But she didn't open any. Instead, she thought about the duet, about that moment when her sound blended with Marcus's. It wasn't about competition anymore, it was about connection. A soft knock came on the door. When she opened it, Marcus stood there, without his bodyguards, without his trademark coat, just him holding 2 cups of coffee. Mind if I come in? He asked. Lila blinked, surprised, then smiled. Of course. He looked around her modest apartment, the cracked walls, the sheet music pinned near the mirror, the single chair near the window. This place reminds me of where I started, he said quietly. Tiny rooms, big dreams. They sat together, sipping the coffee in silence for a while. Finally, Lila spoke. Why did you come? Marcus smiled faintly. Because yesterday, You gave me something I lost, purpose. She looked at him curiously. And he continued, when you get to the top, people stop telling you the truth, they just clap no matter what you play. I thought I was still inspiring people, but I wasn't, I was just performing. Lila looked down. You inspired me, she said softly. Maybe because I never saw the fame, only the music. Marcus nodded slowly. Then that's what I want again, music that matters. He leaned forward. How would you feel about recording an album together? Lila froze. An album? With you? He chuckled. Yes, with me, half your soul, half my experience. Let's make something timeless, her eyes lit up. But I don't have money or a label. Or... Marcus interrupted with a grin. Don't worry about that. I've got connections, you bring the heart. I'll handle the business. In the weeks that followed, the unlikely duo became the center of the music world. Studios lined up. Journalists begged for interviews. But both of them ignored the fame and focused on sound. The album was titled Two Notes, representing the contrast and unity between their worlds. Recording wasn't easy, though. Marcus was a perfectionist. Every note, every beat had to be precise. Lila, on the other hand, thrived on emotion and improvisation. Let the music breathe, she would say. It doesn't always need to be perfect. He'd frown, muttering. Perfection is music, they clashed, argued, and sometimes refused to talk for hours. One afternoon, after another failed take, Lila threw her trumpet case shut. You said you wanted to make something real. Not flawless, she said, tears in her voice. My father used to play wrong notes all the time. But people listened because they felt him. Marcus stayed silent for a moment, then sighed. You're right, he said softly. I forgot again. The next day, he walked into the studio early and placed something on her seat. The silver pin shaped like a music note. The one she always wore, he had polished it overnight. I think your mentor dropped this during rehearsal, he said. She smiled, realizing what he meant. Thank you. When they started recording again, the energy changed. The music became alive, not just practiced but heartfelt. They mixed classical jazz with street soul, creating something new that no one had heard before. Sometimes Marcus would stop mid-song, laugh, and say, You're impossible. Lila, and she'd grin back, You're too perfect. Marcus, by the time the album was finished, everyone in the studio knew it was special. During the final playback, both sat silently as the speakers filled the room with their music. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about two lives stitched together through sound. When the album released, it shattered records. Critics called it the rebirth of emotion in modern jazz, and fans around the world streamed it nonstop. People cried to the tracks, danced to them, found themselves in them. Lila and Marcus were invited to perform live again, this time not as rivals but as partners. During one concert in New York, Lila looked at the crowd and then at Marcus. Do you ever think about that day? She whispered between songs. He smiled. Every time I play. As the lights dimmed and the crowd waited for their final piece, Marcus leaned toward her and said quietly, You've changed more than my music, Lila. You changed me. She looked at him and replied, You listened, Marcus. That's what music was missing. Then they began their last song, a soft, soulful duet that silenced thousands of people into stillness. The melody carried the sound of memory, forgiveness, and gratitude. It was the kind of music that didn't just fill the air. It stayed in hearts. As the final note hung in the room, Marcus stepped aside, motioning to Lila, letting her take the applause alone. The audience stood, clapping, cheering. Some had tears in their eyes. Others just smiled in awe. In that moment, Lila realized something. She didn't just prove herself to the world. She helped a legend rediscover his soul when they walked off stage. Marcus turned to her and said, You've got a gift. Don't ever let the world polish it until it shines too much. The beauty is in the raw, and Lila smiled, holding her trumpet close because for the first time, she felt not like a student or a rival, but an artist whose sound had truly changed everything. The night after their New York performance felt like a dream suspended in the city lights. Fans still gathered outside the hotel, holding posters that read Two Notes Forever and Lila and Marcus, the sound that healed the world. But upstairs, in a quiet suite overlooking the streets below, Lila sat by the window, trumpet in hand, staring into the city that once seemed too far away to reach. Marcus entered the room, still dressed in his stage clothes, his usually proud shoulders now relaxed. Can't sleep either? He asked. Lila smiled softly. Too much noise in my head. He laughed lightly. That's what happens when you make history. She shook her head. It's not history, Marcus, it's healing. He leaned against the wall, watching her carefully. You know, I used to think winning awards or selling out stadiums was the peak, he said. But tonight, when I saw you take that bow, I realized the peak is peace. I hadn't felt that in years. Lila looked down at her trumpet. Music gives us that peace, doesn't it? Even when the world's loud. Marcus nodded slowly. It does if you let it. Then he paused as if debating something inside. There's something I haven't told you. Lila glanced at him, curious. What is it? His eyes softened. Doctors told me last year that I should stop playing soon. My hands... He held them up, slightly shaking. They're getting weaker. Lila's face fell. You're sick? He smiled faintly. Just getting old. Kid, I can still play, but not for long. Maybe a few more months, maybe a year. He looked out the window, his reflection pale in the glass. I wanted my last project to mean something real. That's why I'm glad it was you. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The hum of the city below felt distant. Lila finally spoke. Then we'll make every note count, Marcus. Everyone? Her voice was steady but full of emotion. He chuckled softly. You sound just like your father. Her eyes widened slightly. You knew my father? Marcus nodded slowly. A long time ago, I met him in Chicago. He played on the street corner near a club where I used to perform. I remember one night, my band was late, and I heard this man outside playing the trumpet in the rain. Not for money, just for love, it was. Beautiful. Lila's breath caught. That was him, she whispered. He told me once a famous musician stopped to listen. But I thought he was making it up. Marcus smiled. Guess he wasn't. He told me that night. Music is only real when it comes from pain. I never forgot those words, but I didn't understand them until now. Tears welled up in Lila's eyes. He would have been proud of you, Marcus. He shook his head. No, he'd be proud of you. The next few months became a blur of stages. Flights and lights. Lila and Marcus performed across cities. Paris, Tokyo, Rome, filling every hall to the brim. But offstage, they were more like family than partners. She made sure he rested between shows, and he told her stories of his wild youth, the mistakes, the loneliness behind the fame. During one rehearsal in Paris, Marcus dropped his trumpet mid-note. The hall went silent. He bent down quickly to pick it up, pretending it was nothing. But Lila saw his trembling hands. She walked over quietly, picked up the trumpet, and held it out to him. You've carried the world with this, she said softly. Let me carry it for you now. That night, they decided to change their tour's final performance. Instead of both playing equally, Marcus would start, then let Lila finish alone. He wanted the world to hear her sound rise beyond his. It's how it should end, he said gently. Old giving way to new. The final concert took place in Los Angeles. Where Marcus had first begun his career, the hall was filled with faces from every generation, musicians, fans, students, reporters, everyone who had ever loved their story. Backstage, Marcus adjusted his tie slowly. His fingers stiff, Lila stood behind him, helping him fix it. You nervous? She asked. He grinned. More than my first concert. Then it means it still matters, she said quietly. He nodded. It does more than ever. As the lights dimmed, they walked out together. The audience rose instantly, the applause thundering through the hall. Marcus raised his trumpet, his eyes finding hers. Ready? He whispered. Always, she replied. The first notes he played were shaky but full of warmth. Every breath carried the weight of decades, and yet it felt light. The crowd listened in silence, cherishing every second. Halfway through, he lowered his trumpet, looked at Lila and nodded. She stepped forward. Lifting her own instrument, her melody began where his left off, and smooth, soulful, alive. It wasn't just a continuation. It was a conversation between generations. Her notes rose like sunlight breaking through clouds. Marcus smiled faintly, watching her with pride. And when the final note echoed into the hall, he whispered, That's it. That's the sound. The audience erupted into a standing ovation. Lila looked back, but Marcus had stepped off stage, letting her have the moment when she found him backstage. He was sitting quietly, smiling. You did it, he said softly. She knelt beside him. We did it, he chuckled. No, kid, you carried it across the finish line. He placed his hand gently over hers. Promise me one thing. Keep the soul in your music. No matter how bright the lights get, she nodded. Unable to speak, he leaned back, his eyes glistening with peace. Good. Then I can rest easy. That night, as the stars shimmered over the city, the story of the legend and the girl played across every screen in the world. But in the quiet backstage corner, the only sound was a young woman holding her trumpet, whispering to the memory of the man who helped her find her voice. You'll always be in every note I play. The morning after the Los Angeles concert arrived with a strange quiet. The streets were busy, the headlines loud, yet to Lila, everything moved in slow motion. The newspapers called it the night that redefined jazz, and the internet overflowed with clips of her final solo. But none of it felt real. Not yet. Marcus had left the hotel early that morning, leaving behind only a note written in his elegant handwriting. Gone to see an old friend. Keep playing, kid. You've got the light now. M. Lila smiled softly when she read it, but something in her chest felt heavy, an ache she couldn't explain. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her trumpet case. Days passed, then weeks. Their album, 2 Notes, climbed to #1 worldwide. Critics hailed it as the return of true emotion in modern music. But while the world celebrated, Lila felt lost. Without Marcus by her side, the stage lights seemed too bright, too empty. Every sound felt incomplete. One afternoon, as she rehearsed alone in the same old community hall where it all began, Mr. Gray entered slowly, his steps echoing. You've grown quiet, he said gently. Your sound has changed. Lila looked up, wiping her eyes. It feels hollow, Mr. Gray. Every note feels like something's missing. He nodded thoughtfully. That's because your music always came from love, and right now, you're grieving. She lowered her trumpet. He was more than a teacher. I know, Mr. Gray said, but grief is also music, child. You just have to let it play. That evening, Lila sat at the window, trumpet resting across her lap. The city outside shimmered in gold, and she whispered to herself, maybe I'll see him again. Her phone buzzed, a message from Marcus's assistant. Lila, Marcus wants to see you. He's in Chicago. Her heart skipped a beat. She packed her bag immediately. The train ride was long and filled with memories. Every city that passed by reminded her of a performance, a laugh, a lesson. When she finally arrived, the air smelled of rain and jazz. The city her father had once loved. Marcus was staying in a small apartment near the old music district. When she knocked, it was his soft voice that answered. Come in. He sat by the window, a blanket over his legs, trumpet on his lap. The once steady hands trembled faintly, but his eyes, those wise, soulful eyes, were still alive with warmth. You look stronger, he said, smiling. I heard your solo in Paris. Even from here, Lila blinked back tears. You were listening? Always, he said. You carried our sound farther than I ever could. She walked over, kneeling beside him. You were supposed to be there with me. He chuckled softly. I was, just not on stage. He handed her his old trumpet, the same one he had played for decades. This belongs to you now? She shook her head. Marcus, I can't take this. You can, he said gently. You earned it. You reminded the world that music isn't about being the best. It's about being true. They talked for hours, about life, about her father, about the strange paths that brought them together. The rain tapped softly on the window, and for a moment time felt suspended. Marcus looked at her and said quietly, Promise me something. Anything, she whispered. When I'm gone, keep playing our song, not for fame, not for stages, but for the people who forget how to feel. Lila's throat tightened. You're not going anywhere. He smiled faintly. Every musician leaves, but the music stays. The next morning, when she returned with breakfast, Marcus's apartment was silent. The trumpet lay on the table beside his folded glasses, and a note rested on top. You were my final duet, Lila. Thank you for giving my silence a voice. Tears streamed down her face as she sat beside him, clutching the trumpet to her chest. Outside, the sky broke into soft rain, the same kind her father once played through, the same kind Marcus had loved. The funeral was small, intimate. Musicians from around the world gathered. Playing his favorite melodies, Lila didn't speak. She simply lifted her trumpet and played, never a slow, haunting tune that carried every emotion she couldn't say. Her sound filled the chapel, blending sorrow with peace. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was sacred. People cried quietly. Some closed their eyes. Marcus's assistant whispered, "He would have loved that." Lila smiled faintly. "He's hearing it." Months passed and Lila took a break from concerts. Choosing to travel instead, she visited small schools, taught children how to play, and told them about Marcus, the man who listened. She played in hospitals, on street corners, even in quiet parks. Her music had changed, softer, deeper, like a living conversation between her father, and Marcus one evening. She stood on a bridge overlooking the city lights, Marcus's trumpet in her hands. She raised it and played gently into the night. The wind carried her melody far across the rooftops. Each note shimmered with gratitude and memory. Down below, people paused, looking up, captivated by the sound that seemed to come from nowhere. Some smiled, some cried, none knowing who played it. But they all felt it, that same warmth that once filled a crowded hall. When she finished, Lila looked toward the sky and whispered, "You're still here, both of you." The stars flickered faintly. As if answering, in that moment she realized something profound. She was no longer the girl who played to be heard. She was the woman who played to keep others remembered. And as her trumpet glowed under the starlight, she knew her journey wasn't ending, it was continuing, one note, one heartbeat, one memory at a time. A full year passed since Marcus Dean's funeral, but his presence still echoed in every note Lila played. She had become a symbol of soul in music, yet fame never changed her. She still carried her trumpet in the same worn brown case, still smiled shyly when fans asked for photos, and still said the same quiet line before every show. "This one's for him." That summer, Lila received an invitation that made her heart stop for a moment. It was a letter from the Chicago Philharmonic Hall, the same city where her father once played on the street corners, and where Marcus had first discovered the soul of jazz. The letter asked her to perform at a tribute concert honoring Marcus Dean, a legacy of sound. She stared at the invitation for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. The thought of stepping onto that stage without him made her chest ache. But then she remembered his words, "When I'm gone, keep playing our song," she whispered softly. "All right, Marcus, one more duet." The evening of the tribute arrived wrapped in gold and nostalgia. The hall glowed with warm lights, its marble walls lined with portraits of musical legends. Marcus's picture hung at the center, smiling, trumpet in hand, eyes bright with life. Backstage, Lila sat quietly, holding the trumpet he had given her. The familiar weight brought comfort around her. Other musicians tuned their instruments, chatting in low tones, but she remained still, lost in memory. Her reflection in the mirror looked older, calmer, yet still carried that spark, the same spark that once made her play in the street fair years ago. When the curtains lifted, the audience greeted her with a long, emotional applause. People from around the world had come, students, artists, even children who had only known Marcus through his music. Lila walked to the center of the stage, her steps steady, her eyes soft. She placed the trumpet near her lips, closed her eyes, and whispered, "This is for you, both of you." The first note floated through the hall like a sigh, slow and trembling. The melody she played was called Two Notes, The Farewell, a song she had written herself. It began with Marcus's style, deep, smooth jazz rhythms that rolled like slow thunder, and then shifted into her own raw, emotional tone, blending pain with peace. The audience sat frozen. Not a single cough, not a single whisper. Every sound that left her trumpet told a story, of a father who taught her to love music, of a legend who reminded her how to believe in it, and of a girl who had found herself through both. Halfway through the performance, she paused, then looked toward the empty seat in the front row, the same spot she had imagined her father sitting years ago. Her lips quivered slightly, and a tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't stop. She let that tear become part of the sound. And when she reached the final section, she did something no one expected. She switched trumpets. Pulling out Marcus's old golden one from its case, the audience gasped softly. She took a deep breath and played the final notes with his trumpet. The sound richer, warmer, more alive than ever before. It felt as though Marcus himself were standing beside her again, guiding her through every breath. Every vibration of metal, the melody rose higher, soaring above the stage, above the hall, until it seemed to touch the ceiling itself. Then it softened, fading into a whisper, the sound of goodbye. When the last note vanished into silence, the crowd remained still for a few heartbeats. Then came the sound, the softest clap followed by another, and then an ocean of applause that rose and rose until the hall shook. People stood, cheering, crying. Holding each other, some shouted, "Bravo!" Others simply whispered, "Thank you." Lila lowered the trumpet slowly, her tears falling freely now. She bowed deeply, not for the audience, but for the two souls who had shaped her life. "You did it, Marcus," she whispered. "We finished the song." After the show, she stayed alone in the hall long after everyone left. The lights dimmed and she walked to Marcus's portrait, setting his trumpet beneath it. "This belongs here," she said softly. "You carried the world with it. Now it will carry you." A janitor passing by stopped to listen as she began playing one last short melody, just for herself, a soft tune that mixed joy and sadness. As the final note faded, she smiled faintly. "Good night, my friend." In the years that followed, Lila became one of the most respected names in modern music, but she never forgot her roots. She built a small foundation in Marcus's name, funding music programs for underprivileged kids. Her motto was painted on the front door in gold letters: "Play to express, not to impress," and the very line her father used to tell her. Every year she returned to that old community hall with Mr. Gray, now older, slower, but still smiling, and performed for free. The audience was smaller now, mostly children with big dreams and tiny instruments, but she always told them the same story before playing. "There once was a man who challenged me," she'd say, smiling. "He thought he was teaching me about music, but he ended up teaching me about life." The children would laugh and she'd raise her trumpet and play. The sound still carried warmth, still carried truth, still carried Marcus, and one evening as the sunset poured through the dusty windows, Lila played that same melody again, the one she played for Marcus's farewell outside. The wind picked up, swirling leaves in rhythm with her song. For a moment, she could almost hear another trumpet answering faintly in the distance. She paused, smiling. "Still showing off, aren't you?" she whispered to the air. Then she lifted her trumpet again and finished the piece, soft and slow, letting it fade into silence. In that silence lived everything: her father's laughter, Marcus's wisdom, and her own journey from fear to freedom. When she finally set the trumpet down, she whispered, "The music never ends. It just finds new hands, and somewhere far beyond the sound, two souls must have smiled, proud, at peace, and forever alive through the notes she left behind."